Good evening. Welcome to Clean Energy Connections. This is a creation of Solar One and NYC Acre. This is the last event of our 2014 Grid Edge series, which has been a special collaboration between us and Green Tech Media. Thank you to Green Tech Media. Tonight we will be discussing grid edge analytics, advances in big data, intelligent software, and analytics behind the meter. My name's Mike Simmons. I work at Solar One as a regional outreach contractor on behalf of NYSERDA. I manage this event series and help clean tech startups and researchers connect with NYSERDA funding opportunities. Entrepreneurs in the audience should come speak to me after the event. I can help you. Before I pass it over to Emily and we kick the event off, I want to go over a few event logistics very briefly. Green Tech Media is graciously live streaming this event. So if you need to get up for whatever reason, please avoid the cameras. Also, the bar is closed during the event, so there's no need to get up for that. It will reopen after the event for networking. Please watch your beer bottles. Last event, we set a record. There were no dropped beer bottles during the event. I want to keep that up. The reason being it disturbs the recording instruments. So please be careful with those when you set them down. Cell phones on mute, please. Because we are live streaming, I want to shout out our watch parties. We have a watch party at the Urban Future Lab in Brooklyn, and our first international watch party at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. In-person audience members, you guys, this is an interactive discussion. So if you want to ask the panel questions, you should have gotten a note card at registration, a note card and a golf pencil. If you didn't, you can raise your hand. Matthew here will bring you a note card. That's how you ask questions to the panel. You write down your questions. If you want to address it to a certain person, you can do that. Raise your hand. Matt will come pick it up. He'll bring it to me. We'll give it to the panel. You can also tweet. This is for live stream watch parties especially. Tweet at CleanECNYC and with the hashtag CleanNRGX. It's on your program. That's about it, except that I want to plug our very gracious, generous sponsors for making this event possible. Con Ed, NYSERDA, and NYC EDC, thank you very much. And to our partners, Enernol and Young Professionals in Energy for helping promote this wonderful event. And without further ado, here's Emily.
Great, thanks, oh, just one clap? That was nice. You got one. You got one. We'll take it. We'll take it. Good evening. My name is Emily Wheeler. I'm the director of NYC Acre and the Urban Future Lab. So thank you for joining us tonight. And for those who were with us at our last event, you had the pleasure of hearing firsthand that New York is really ready to shake up the utility industry, and we're excited for that. Under the charge of Governor Cuomo, and that is actually the recently renewed charge of Governor Cuomo, and with the direction of Audrey Zibelman, the chair of the PSC, New York State is fundamentally altering utility regulation to meet the needs of a more distributed, consumer-focused energy system. The policy is propelling New York State to become the leader in clean technology and energy in the future. And tonight's panel will focus on the advances in behind-the-meter resources and how big data analytics will help unlock greater efficiencies and resiliencies in the grid. But before we get to that, and to the panel, I want to share with you another way that we at Acre are actually stimulating thought leadership in the energy sector. Acre and the Urban Future Lab have a number of invaluable sponsors, including NYSERDA, ADT, National Grid, and ESD. Additionally, we are supported by EDC. And this year, we're a partner on their Big Apps competition. And for those of you who don't know what Big Apps is, it's a citywide challenge that brings the brightest minds in tech, design, and business to solve New York City's toughest challenges. And this year, the competition had over 100 participants build, pitch, and demonstrate their applications and their projects that help New York City live better, play better, learn better, and work better. So Acre actually sponsored the Energy on Demand Challenge, and we have a special treat for you tonight because the winner of that category, which was Tumalo, right on demand, here he comes, is going to join us on stage now to share their solution. So Tumalo is actually, I believe how you pronounce it, is helping buildings get more out of their energy storage systems. And in light of the great things happening in New York State and with REV, they are a very exciting company to watch as they begin to help bring distributed energy resources into the market. So without further ado, we will bring them on.
All right, thank you. All right, good evening. So, like was introduced, we were competing in the Big Apps competition, and we competed in a slightly different category. So we competed as an interconnected device, because Tumalo makes energy storage devices. Our mission is to lower the electric bills of K-12 schools at no cost using these energy storage. But before we kind of get into the details, I'd like to start by thinking about the big picture. So we can think about the electric grid as like the world's largest supply chain, right? It has all the same elements as a physical supply chain, except for on the grid, there are no warehouses. And this causes a number of problems, right? Just imagine the pandemonium that would ensue if there were no warehouses for physical stuff, right? So imagine Christmas Day. We have to deliver all of these presents in real time. Well, we're gonna need trucks, right? Lots of trucks and roads that are hundreds of lanes wide. And then by Christmas afternoon, of course, all the trucks would be idle and all the roads would be empty. Now, this is sort of a silly example, right? You would never build a system like this, except that we live with it every day. We've built the electric grid. So at Tumalo, we're building the electric warehouse. And it looks a little different than a physical warehouse. What this looks like is a network of energy storage systems. These are cabinet-sized batteries, all placed behind the meter where the value is the highest, and then connected over the internet to a cloud server. And this server optimizes the use of this network in real time. And I don't want just my systems on this network. I want storage owners of the future to be able to plug and play, get their systems online, onto the smart grid, and making money for them right away. So that's the big dream, right? The electric warehouse. And this all starts with a single installation. So this is Maple Hill. It's a high school south of here, right near Albany. Oh, sorry, north of here, right just south of Albany. And like many schools, Maple Hill runs on a very tight budget, right? They can't raise taxes, they can't cut salaries, so they understand the importance of reducing their electric bill as being one of the things that they can do that doesn't compromise the health or the education of their students. They've been very aggressive about trying to find energy savings, like schools in general have, because as long as it doesn't take up too much staff time, because they're understaffed, or too much money, because they're underfunded. So these things make them the perfect candidates to pilot energy storage as a service, right? This is a bundle that includes energy storage hardware, Tumalo control software, and an operating agreement that lets us install all of this at no cost and then share in the savings over time. And it's something that Maple Hill is helping us write in order to fit and not fight their budget. They've been very enthusiastic partners in this process. Because they understand there's this need to kind of free up budget space. So the business model looks like this, right? You start by installing energy storage at no cost. We're going to use this to generate revenue in two ways. First is we're going to reduce the peak load of the building. So schools, like other buildings, are hit with a demand charge based on the 15 minutes each month that they use the most power. So if you discharge the storage, you can reduce this peak load, reduce their electric bill. And when we do this, when you can measure this savings, we'll share in the savings with them over time. It turns out that it takes less than 10% of a battery's time to do this peak load reduction. And so with the other 90%, we can use the storage to help stabilize the electric grid and collect a second revenue stream from doing this. So anyone who's interested in sort of the gory technical details can kind of come chat with me after. But we can do this from inside the building, without any net metering, without having to push power back out onto the wires. So that's the dream, that's the wrap up. We're trying to build the electric warehouse, this open network of energy storage systems. And this is a network that begins in our schools by giving them a no-cost way to reduce their electric bills. Because at Tumalo, we think schools should spend their money on kids and not kilowatts. Thank you very much.
Probably don't even need the second shout. Without further ado, I want to bring out Omar Sadeh, the moderator for this night's event. He's a senior analyst at GTM Research, and the panel. Please give them a round of applause.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this live broadcasted panel. I'm delighted to have three extremely progressive companies over here that are really engaged in a multitude of different aspects that pertain to big data, that pertain to intelligent software, and analytics behind the meter. We're going to address various aspects that really fall under those umbrella terms. But first of all, I'm really forgot to mention, I'm really excited that we do have two watch groups out here. I studied at McGill, so I'm happy that there's a representative from Canada, Dalhousie. But if there's anyone from McGill out there that's watching, I challenge you guys to watch us next time as a registered viewer. That being said, I wanted to introduce our panel. First off is all the way on the right over there, Jun Shimada, the founder and CEO of New York-based ThinkEco. Jun leads ThinkEco's technology, innovation, and commercialization efforts, applying his experience to make the company's modlet smarter and easier to use. Nick Payton, the second person, is an associate director of product marketing and strategy at Opower, focusing on Opower's demand response and thermostat management platforms. Nick led market development and regulatory affairs for demand response, wholesale markets, and evaluation of Opower programs. Lastly but not least, Chris Cavana is a principal program manager in the Customer and Strategy Environmental Group at National Grid, and he's also responsible for developing strategies to expand National Grid's U.S. natural gas distribution services. Chris has been in the industry for about 30 years as a licensed professional engineer, a member of the American Society of HVAC Engineers, and a mentor in the Cleantech Open program. So, kicking things off, Jun, you received your PhD in chemical physics from Harvard University, a somewhat unique background for ending up founding an energy efficiency company. Could you, in layman's terms, define to us what analytics or big data, what analytics is, and what it means to a startup like ThinkEco?
Sure. So I think like the methods that are used in data analytics are old, and they are trusted and very, mature, I'd say, coming out of academic labs as well as commercial labs, such as Bell Labs. And I think really the reason why we're talking about data analytics and energy now is that we have the data, and I think starting with the smart meter deployments, we've started to really get information about how people use energy, and we're able to aggregate that, in a usable format up in the cloud. And now we're beginning to distribute sensors because of the Internet of Things. And so what that means is now all these interesting pieces of data have to be understood, and I think the technology is mature to do that. And what I mean by technology are things like machine learning, IT technologies to make the real-time feedback possible. And so I think for us, it's really to understand what the data means. So it means that we have to understand what the utilities want out of the data. Data, after all, are bits, right? Mm-hmm. And they become interesting once we know how to productize it, how to make it meaningful for people so that we can, either change behavior or inform strategy to do better things with the grid. So in my opinion, I think data analytics now, so it's a little bit overused in the industry, but I think the way to look at it is that now it's we have the data, and we're beginning to try to understand what it means for energy, I think. Let's say the implementation of the grid, I guess, is maybe the more relevant term.
And I've seen a lot of, I've seen several media companies, ABC News. I've seen your product on ABC News, Green Tech Media. We've covered them quite a lot, covered you guys quite a lot. And, retail distribution also has, you can go to Best Buy and pick up one of your smart modlets.
Yeah.
But that being said, we've kind of seen a lot of other startup companies approach this field, whether that be startups, whether it be large companies putting dollars towards energy management, hardware and software. What's your differentiating factor? And from a small company, how do you send that added value message to the consumer?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. I think we know what we do is we allow air conditioners to be remotely controlled on and off, and also we monitor their power, right? So if you think about the smart home, right? So right now people talk about the connected home. The smart home technology has been around for years, right? So starting with things like the Crestron system or things that have been out there where people can turn things on and off, that's nothing new. But I think what's interesting now is that, and I think really what we spent a lot of time on before we launched the product was about measuring power, right? So our product combines the ability to switch things on and off with the ability to measure how much these loads are actually using. And that ability to measure is critical for doing utility services, because then you can meet a key requirement for utility programs, which is measurement and verification. If you're going to deploy assets behind the meter, you really need to know what is their intrinsic value, what's their ROI. And so the ability to get that information in real time, quickly, everything is really critical for success in the utility context. If it was just a matter of just switching air conditioners on and off, then I don't think that it's just another product, following a long tradition in home automation. But I think the combination of the two, and then focusing the software towards analyzing energy data, I think was a key development in our product history, and I think has enabled us to move into utility services.
Yeah, and the connected home is definitely going to be a subject we're going to be touching on later on in the panel. So since inception, Opower has really been on the forefront of the big data movement from a utility perspective. And you guys have really struck a meaningful chord between data science and, I guess, behavioral science, human behavioral science. With 95 plus utilities across 9 different countries, give us a sense, or maybe to some of our audience members, what Opower really does, and what does big data analytics mean to Opower?
That's a great question. So the way I like to think about data analytics, I think it's similar to the way you were talking about data analytics.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's what we do. We shut off the lights at opportune times.
We didn't do it.
Yeah. Someone's trying to get at Opower right now. So we use data to achieve specific outcomes. So the way I think about our approach to big data and big data analytics is the analysis is what underlies what we're actually trying to achieve on behalf of the utility, which is ultimately an outcome. And that's where behavioral science combines with data analysis to deliver something that's of value back to the utility, which is why we've had success in utility services as well. Easy way to think about this, thinking of scale, we have hundreds of billions of meter reads in our database right now. We have about 40% of all the U.S. smart meter data, and that's not intended to scare you. It's just intended to show that we have large-scale analysis ongoing. The promise of some approaches to using that data was if we kind of release the data to customers, we'll see a tide of innovation that's going to create a lot of value back for the customer. What we found is customers don't actually respond or react to data at all. Rather, they only react to insights that are given to them at specific times in which they're making a decision. If they have the right insight, if we give them the right information, the right context around that information, they're going to make a better decision, and that'll lead to energy efficiency and demand response. And so that's the core behind, that's the driving principle behind the way that we've designed our solutions in the past. And the easiest way to think about this, there are probably some folks in the room who have received a report from their utility in the mail. So our flagship product was consolidating those hundreds of billions of meter reads of information into a personalized insight to the specific homeowner. It tells them how they use their energy compared to their neighbors. So, keeping up with the Joneses, people respond to that. They're motivated to actually save energy, make a little bit different energy usage decisions, provide tailored tips to them based on what we know about them. And as a result, turns out they save 2% on average everywhere. So it's something it's a universal. We're universally motivated. So that was our core solution. But it gets back to this notion of any time that we can apply data in a way that's engaging customers and motivating them to use energy a little bit differently, we're going to try to do so on behalf of our utility partners. And I should mention that, categorically, we've always been in partnership with utilities such as National Grid, mainly, for a couple reasons, but the biggest reason by far is that they have a really trusted brand with the customer. And we found that working with utilities, it's not only about getting data, but it's about the fact that a letter in the mail, for example, is going to be well received by the customer because it's coming with the utility brand. And we can leverage that. So that's a summary of kind of the way that we think about the market. I'd be happy to talk about some of our newer emerging products that I've been working on.
Well, one of which is that, your bread and butter has been the residential sector in the past.
Yep.
And recently at our SoftGrid conference, you guys announced a partnership with First Fuel.
Yep.
Could you give us a perspective on, what does that mean for Opower? Is it a larger play for broader markets, and how you're going to go about addressing those, maybe larger customers?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we announced the partnership in part because we're obviously not going to expand into the large commercial space. We found consistently that it was a need of a lot of our partners. So we looked at a lot of different partners, and First Fuel, in our opinion, had the best product out there. So we have a partnership with them. What we've tried to design in the commercial space, and the way that we've moved into commercial, is by combining behavioral science and data science and computer science, if you actually want to think about how we're actually designing these products, we found that our niche is we're really good at engaging mass market customers. So residential customers that don't have a natural incentive, don't have someone operating a building, managing that building's energy use. Rather, it's all of us here that don't typically think about energy. So, Accenture has the famous study: customers think about energy 6 minutes, or interact with their utility about energy 6 minutes out of every year. So it's incredibly small portion of time. We're good at engaging those types of customers that don't naturally think about energy. The way we think about the commercial space is the small and medium businesses. So similar to residential customers, small, medium businesses typically don't have a whole lot of time to think about energy. It's the grocery store down the street, the small restaurant down the street, right around the corner here, who have very similar attributes to residential customers in that respect, where our thesis, which is if we give them a little bit better information, package it up in the right way, they can make decisions that are in their own interest, and as a result, they'll be saving a little bit of energy along the way. So we've started with, on our end, with the small medium business sector, and we've partnered with on the large commercial side so that we can create a completed package in that space.
Yeah, rare partnership for you guys. You guys don't have too many out there.
Yeah, the other major one. So in the thermostat space, which is something that I think was going to end up coming up. We have alongside ThinkEco, we have a piece of a program with Con Ed, for example, where our thermostat software is in partnership with Honeywell's hardware. So it's another space where we're a software provider. No natural fit for us to build our own hardware. There are others that do it far better than we do. So partnered with a trusted, reliable brand in Honeywell, and we've created software that allows the customer to both control their thermostat, but also provides data back to our utility partners. So they're getting an understanding both from a measurement and verification perspective, but also getting the data that they need so they can understand perhaps how to target better services back to the customer.
Definitely.
So another example of a partnership that's worked really well for us and that we're really excited about. And on top of that, we and I'll stop after this. But on top of that, we announced an API that we released to all Wi-Fi thermostat manufacturers.
Okay.
And this happened in October. So we've created an API that allows anyone to plug into our software that's being used to run thermostat programs on behalf of our utility partners. So we're looking forward to partnerships with additional hardware providers as well.
Okay. And Chris, you guys have, as a utility, and you're seeing all this big data initiatives, all these companies coming up with bigger and bigger data. I mean, big data has been a thing, and we've been doing it in various other industries as well, and it's been growing and growing. Are we at a focal point? Is this something that's going to be really transformative moving forward? And I mean, from a utilities perspective, again, is this something that you guys can leverage to really make a change in the way people consume energy?
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk for all utilities, but I can talk for us. I mean, this is really an inflection point. I joined the utility industry in 1987, right? About 30 years. So I joined before supply and commodity was unbundled, before we had RGGI and energy and EEPS, Energy Efficiency Portfolio Standard, before we had EPS and renewable portfolio standards and all of that. Every one of those programs kind of took the utility and pushed them away from the customer until energy efficiency. Then we were able to interact more with customers in that. The availability of the kind of data that Opower produces and the kind of functionality that ThinkEcho does lets us reverse course, lets us get back involved with customers, which is really, we see that as a big opportunity. And then when you have policies like REV with the PSC and they talk about market animation, this is the single most exciting time to be in the energy business that I've seen in my entire time, and I think anyone arguably in the time in the decades past. This type of data, we have a lot of data. You all know that. I mean, you're all customers of ours or companies like ours. We've got a lot of data. We know where your properties are. We know what wires going to your house or pipe is going to your house. We know all of that. We've got a lot of new GIS capability. We've got a lot of mapping. We're using that. But we don't know a lot about the customers. We really don't know a lot's on the other side of the meter. We try to do that. And this gives us that opportunity. And then to that, to be able to make much more cost-effective programs for customers and to give customers choices. And we know the customers want choices. They don't want a lot of choices. They don't want a lot of complicated choices. Like we said, it was 9 minutes, I think, that customers think about energy in a year. Yeah. But the ability to tailor things to certain categories is a game changer. So
yeah, and you guys have, implemented quite a few interesting pilot projects yourselves. I think we've covered it a bit, and I've read about it quite a lot. The Worcester project yeah. Could you talk about that, or
Sure.
Seems like a,
I mean, we are one of the companies. When ARA came out, you all know about the stimulus funds a few years ago. We did make an application to the federal government under ARA for a smart grid pilot. We did not get the big one. We did not get one of the big ones. Con Ed did, so congrats to Con Ed on that. But we did get a training grant from DOE and another one that had to do with some demonstration of some new functionality. So we commissioned a 15,000 customer pilot in Worcester, Massachusetts. Worcester, you got to say it like the Massachusetts guys. Yeah. So all you Red Sox fans, I got it right. So in Worcester, we did this, and we really designed a program that was very customer-centric. And we really put a lot of different elements in there and gave a full spectrum of opportunities to customers. First of all, we did something called, I think you've heard this technique, appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is where we basically held a big round table. I think we took a convention center somewhere in Worcester, maybe the DHS Center, whatever it's called, and then brought in a lot of people from the colleges and the Clark University, I think, and Worcester Polytechnic, and a lot of the politicians, and really said, what should you want this to be? And we settled on a program with 4 different aspects to it. One is the grid modernization, based on the customer side and the distribution grid side. On the electric, it's all electric, of course. Home energy management as an option. Time of use rates, which is just getting implemented. And then, of course, the communication and functionality. So customers have a choice. Some customers, all customers have the one thing that's common. They're going to have a picture frame, one of those little like photo digital frames you got in your house, and in there will be what their actual usage is and what it's costing in real time. I think it's not exactly in real time it was going to be, but it's very close to it, because it's all about information, which is what you guys do. It's about giving people information. Everybody gets that functionality, and then all of this meter reading data. Then from that, there are different options, and the options span from some control like demand response, I can get on my phone and turn things on and off, to very sophisticated. Using their own broadband, they can have a home energy management system, they can remotely turn things on and off, get all kinds of reports and programs, and so it's no one size fits all, and this is what we need the data for, so we can figure out what all these different customers would like to do without getting crazy, without doing a whole bunch of different options, and that ties in exactly with what you folks do and what ThinkEcho does.
Yeah, and on that note, again, we brought this up previously, the connected home, or the future of the connected home. With the advent of higher technology, higher tech consumer electronics, you're seeing companies like Nest and all these other, I guess, home automation companies bring in everything, increase connectivity and increase capability inside the home. And then you're seeing, additional service providers like telcos, like solar installers that do have a piece of hardware on top of the home security providers. They're all jumping into the home and trying to get a piece of energy management. It seems, at least, they're bundling in energy management solutions to their existing services. As a utility, do you guys feel a bit of competition from these guys?
No, it's the opposite. We feel like they're enablers. I mean, we don't have core competencies in everything. We have no interest in being a security company or that kind of thing. But I also I ran some pilots early on. Like I remember anybody remember Shell Home Genie? I know I did a pilot on that when they wanted to go into the home energy management system, and we put a bunch of these in, and we did something with Honeywell, and we looked at all of these things. And customers don't break things up the way we do. We talk about energy and all that stuff, but customers were looking at the whole picture. Even we had we did it through we had an unregulated service company at the time, and they implemented this for us. And I got one in the president of that company's house, right? And I go into his office, I said, "So Joe, how's it going?" So Joe, I go into his house and he goes, "Oh, Chris, this is really cool. You got to look at this thing." He shows me on the screen. I figure he's going to show me all the energy data about how much his house is using and his boilers and all of that. He pulls up, there's the camera. The thing had cameras in it. He pulls up the camera and he says, "That's my house. That's my living room, and that's my son there. Why is he there? Why isn't he in school?" So the point is, it's part of a bigger proposition. It can't be just the energy. It's got to be the whole value-added package, of which energy is a big part, but it's not, discrete.
I completely agree. In New York, unfortunately, we don't have the luxury, or at least I don't have the luxury of having, numerous or multiple rooms in my apartment. So on the note of the connected home in New York, or even the connected crammed apartment, New York City has, I think, an estimated 6 million window air conditioning units. John, this might be your territory over here. Where do you see the future of that connected apartment, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's a trend that is just going to revolutionize how electronics are used in the house. I often think about when did this start, right? And because I think when I started the company back 6-7 years ago, I remember, one of the people that we talked to was his professor, Cambridge, and he had his whole home, wired up with X10, with the X10 system, right? It's a connected home, basically. But no one else knows about the X10, but he was like, I know there's all this old technology. Why is what you're doing going to change things? And I think the bottom line is that what we've seen is that starting from the silicon, the wireless technology has become cheaper. It's become more energy efficient, so things can be battery powered. You're beginning to see standards emerge, connecting all these things. So what we're going to see is a lot of appliances, not just window air conditioners, everything being connected to the internet. Now, what that means for us is that, while we love the product that we created, the Modelet very much, I think you're going to see a situation where that's going to be a great retrofit solution, but you're going to see more and more consumer uptake of devices that are already going to be connected to the internet. And to me, the bridge that's going to connect that consumer product to energy or to utilities or utility services is going to be software. It's fundamentally going to be a software-driven industry, in my opinion. And this is not a bad thing, because I think at the end of the day, if the consumer can buy these devices into their house and enable energy efficiency for the utility, it's just a better use of dollars all around, And it also means that the consumer is going to be a stakeholder in energy efficiency, which is a great thing, then they can, turn to like Opower's, insights and alter their behavior, and that overall is a good thing for, I think, everybody down the road. So I think we're beginning to see a real revolution here. And, I think it's still early, to be honest, because you're beginning to see what's being sold right now are gateways that connect Bluetooth, Zigbee, Z-Wave, Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Who needs 4 standards right now, right? So 3 years from now, you're going to probably just see 1 or 2, and I don't know which one's going to emerge. I think Wi-Fi is a strong candidate. Bluetooth's a strong candidate, But, you're going to see consolidation, you're going to see standardization, and that's when things will become much easier, for I think companies like us to do our services.
And you mentioned, Nick, I'm going to get to you in a second on this connected home issue, but you mentioned a few things. You mentioned price declining for maybe hardware and even software, I'd assume. But before that, I think maybe it was Nick, you brought this up in a Accenture study saying that people think about energy management in the home for 9 minutes per year. That's astounding. How can you really sell a solution to a consumer? Is there enough motivation for a consumer to go out and purchase a solution for, I don't know, $200, $300, $400, and then expect the returns over the next 3, 4, 5 years? Is there enough of an incentive there for them?
Yeah, I think so. And this is what we see, because we do our annual surveys of our customers as well, right? And what we see is basically a very broad consumer base, right? One part of the population is definitely interested in energy savings. Another part only cares about dollars saved. Another, group only cares about new technologies. They like doing things that's cool, right? Another group that does things because, I heard about the news and I just want to try it out, So, and that is what the consumer base is. If you look at how people have always marketed products to these people, right? You always target a certain segment and you sell. And it's the same thing. Once everything becomes connected, then, people are going to buy connected window air conditioners for different reasons. Some might, if there's a way to save money, you buy it for that reason. If there's a way for them to, save energy, that's a way, and that will require software, right? So to me, it's not just a hardware, it's going to be an app that's going to have to be sold with the air conditioner that actually provides a real value proposition, for the customer. And I think we're still figuring that out. I think we're beginning to realize that, energy savings alone is not a strong motivator of the residential customer. I think business owners are simpler to figure out because, I own a small business, and sure as hell, if I can save $1, I do that, So, but I think the residential customer does it for many different reasons. You have a very broad demographic base, very broad age base, and I think the challenge, for us, like if Opower Think Eco needs to sign up customers to do energy services, we have to do that marketing well. We have to figure out the right value proposition.
Yeah.
And, and energy and the, let's say demand reduction, it has to be a hidden value proposition, right, among the thing that really motivates these people to implement.
Couldn't agree with you more. And later on, we're going to get to this thing about having all that data out there and what regulators think. And since there's no regulator, at least on the panel, please speak your minds when we get to that. But right now, Nick, so there's a big or seemingly big initiative that are pushing our industry towards more customer-oriented engagement. So that being said, when you think of data analytics in the connected home, the question that comes to mind is this a energy management question, or is this a customer management question?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. To frame it, I want to continue this train
Please,
of
yeah,
thought,
go ahead.
and then I think that I'll eventually get there. But yeah, it'll all make sense, I promise. So the way, and I totally agree with the way you're thinking about the market. I think the 9 minutes a year that people think about energy usage, and that seems a little bit divorced by the rapid uptake or the perceived rapid uptake of some of these Wi-Fi connected thermostats in particular. But the way I think about the connected home, I guess, revolution, if it ends up occurring, is the similar way that we've always thought about AMI, and I think this is what you're hitting on, which is the value for the customer. Actually, the value provided back to the customer is going to be the services through software provided on top of what ends up being a platform. enabling technology in the home, whether it's outside of the home or whether it's beyond the meter, whether it's advanced metering, whether it's a connected device, to the extent it's providing data, it's going to provide an opportunity for those value-add services. And I think that's the perfect way to think about it, is just thinking about it in terms of the software services that can be provided back to customers on top of that hardware. I think in the near term, utilities have a big role to play. We've always thought this, especially on devices like thermostats that control up to 50% of the load in the home. To the extent that they're big energy-using devices, I think that the value from those types of devices is always going to be less. You're going to be able to do less with it unless you combine it with, for example, energy usage data or other types of data that you can get from utility partners. So I think there'll always be a little bit more value that you can provide, especially when you're trying to understand whether customers are actually using the device to save, which hasn't been that clear in the past. But that leads to the way that I'm thinking about whether this is an energy or a customer management problem. At Opower, and we're obviously biased because we're in the energy space, but the way that we oftentimes think about the value provided back to customers, our utility partners will come to us and say, we have a customer engagement problem. And the way that we've always thought about customer engagement is the way you provide value back to customers is through energy efficiency, through demand response. You talk about it in a different way because no one understands those terms, or few people understand those terms, but you provide customers, the way you engage customers, you give them the tools to manage and control their own use. They save as a result, they feel empowered, and you're actually solving your customer engagement problem in the process. A good example, we designed our solution specifically to drive energy savings. Then we had the idea of running a survey to test whether we were having an impact on customer satisfaction as well, just by chance. We thought that it would be a good idea to test it out. And we found that we were lifting satisfaction by 5 to 10%. And if you can move the needle on satisfaction, that's a big number. So the way that we think about it, we actually think that both are deeply entwined, especially as it relates to using devices in the home, as it relates to managing your own energy use. We think that energy, giving customers, enabling them to manage their use better will actually result in more satisfied customers. And so you can actually end up killing two birds with one stone. And I think that's the premise behind the way that we've approached customer engagement in the industry. Yeah.
Yeah, good points. Now, just switching gears a little bit, in New York, all residential customers here have access to, adopting real-time pricing. However, the New York Public Service Commission reports relatively very low adoption rates. And in light of the Reforming the Energy Vision initiative going on here in New York, is there anything that utilities, or do you see what utilities are going to be doing different to change the way consumers adopt these dynamic pricing, and what are you going to do to sort of educate them and tell them about it?
Well, yeah, there's certainly a need for education. I think I would say we've come to the conclusion that we're not in the business of telling customers what they should and shouldn't be doing. Customers have a tendency to make up. We have a tendency to make up our own minds. With companies like Opower, we can provide the information and help them. But then it's a matter of good policy. It's a matter of good policy and value, and the value-added services. A lot of us buy a hybrid car. A lot of us buy hybrid cars. We do that for a reason. Maybe not. Maybe it's cost-effective. Maybe it's not. But it's something that we do because we think we believe it's a good thing to do, and we think a lot of customers will feel that way. So time-of-day pricing is not a new thing. This has been around. We're in upstate New York. This was tried in about 10, 12 years ago, and there was a pilot on it, and there was a lot of pushback. A lot of people just didn't want to do it. But it's a very different age. 10 years is an eon, in this age, and the availability of information that Opower does, and the types of functionality that didn't exist 10 years ago, make the value proposition dramatically different. So I think once we convince them that there is a value to it, I think we'll see the uptake, and that's what we think is so exciting about Rev, because Rev is really about engaging the customers instead of it being a utility pushing it on customers, that there be a pull. And about when they talk about when the PSC and Audrey Zilberman talks about animating markets, that's a great phrase, and that is a great phrase, and it's probably why we're all here.
Yeah, and she had tons to say at the last event we held. But on the note of Rev and the transformation of utilities to DSPs, distribution system platform providers, And the establishment of the energy exchanges, we're going to see a whole lot more of data, specifically consumer data, being passed around, going to various vendors or various stakeholders in the whole system.
Yeah.
The first concern that comes to mind, well, two concerns. First, in light of all that data, how do you address privacy concerns from the customer? And two, how do you use that data when regulators don't want you to, I guess, differentiate between customers and are pretty strict on strict on allocating programs to equally to everyone, I guess.
Right. Yeah, well, I guess on the two parts of your question there. The security part, that's going to take some, I think, innovative drafting of regulations. Right now, of course, you're right. We are not allowed, we as a utility, and we're an electric utility in upstate New York and in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, we are not allowed to give any customer information to anybody for any reason. Very, very strict. We can be penalized and fined, and it's a very strict thing, and it's the way it should be. Having said that, there's got to be some sort of a system set up where maybe either the information is anonymous or somehow it can be used by aggregators for study purposes, things like that. So those policy discussions, I think, are going on, and then Rev, I think, is addressing that. So that's definitely in need. Because right now we basically got to get a signature. You'd have to give everybody would have to sign a form and such. Yes, I allow it to reduce their data and what for, and that I think would be impractical and for the kind of nimble things companies like yours need. And then the second question was regarding
The
the DSPs and then
yeah, we addressed exactly the privacy issues, but also addressing the customer base, but not segmenting them into
right,
different groups.
not segmenting, right, because utility rates now, utility services, every utility regulator who's out there today was brought up with the notion that utility rates, which are distribution rates, I'm not talking about commodity, are cost of service based. So ideally, in the ideal world, to a regulator, what you pay should be exactly what yours costs, plus the profit for the utility, but that should be cost based. What Rev is about is saying, no, it's really more about the value to the customer and the value to society and the value to programs. So that's how you create all this pull. So that, I think, is very core to the very high level Rev vision. That's the way it is now, and that I assume that's going to change as Rev develops.
Yeah, and I guess there's been a lot of conversation recently with a somewhat controversial decision made by a DC court to repeal FERC Order 745. That really, what FERC Order 75 was it enabled demand response to be considered on par with wholesale power from power plants. Essentially what it did was evaluate the curtailment of demand at the same, the kilowatt hours associated with curtailment to the same amount as the kilowatt hours concerned with generation. Now, this seems to be in your wheelhouse, Jen. What's your perspective on that? And first of all, I hear notions that this might go to the Supreme Court, that it might be re-implemented. Is this something that you're worried about? Does it even affect your business model?
So, it really impacts more the commercial sector. So I'm in the residential sector, and it's a very different marketplace for us. And I can't really, comment on whether it's going to go up to the Supreme Court. It appears to be sort of a state rights versus federal rights kind of argument, and I'm definitely not a lawyer. But my sense is that it's moving towards, it's sort of echoing the market, let's say the sentiment generally, that things should start moving towards, more deregulation, let's say, right? Things should be more market-driven. And I think this is, in my opinion, generally a good thing, right? But, with some caution, because I think that decision was critical for the growth of the demand response industry, right? Because it provided, it protected these businesses while the market was still very young. And I think, it's hard to say whether we're at that inflection point where having federal support for energy efficiency is can we take away that support right away? I think everybody would say the answer is no. But we need to take baby steps maybe, right, towards a situation where the market has more freedom, right, and, like if I'm in the residential sector, consumers have the ability to opt into a energy efficiency program, DR program, right, and I think that is generally the way things should go, and that will make the overall DR market a healthier marketplace, more sustainable, let's say. I think we're still many years away from that, but I think the things that are happening, with the FERC decision, the REV, all that is, in my opinion, consistent with that general philosophy. And I think it's just a question of how soon to implement, how is it going to shake out the current players. I think all that is still an open question. It still is a young market, I think, for DR. So.
Yeah, and again, we've got a ton of questions from the audience and Twitter, but before we jump to that, Nick, do you have anything to add on what, as you're entering in the smaller and larger commercial space, what's your perspective on the, FERC Order 745, what's happening with that?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say on that just because we've been focused on first, tackling the energy efficiency side on the small, medium business piece. And to the extent that we're, and it's actually worth noting, we also do produce demand response on behalf of our utility partners. We created a new approach actually that I'll get to in one second. But we also do it through devices, direct load control. But for us, because we're partnering with utilities, it's a little bit less. We're not aggregators in the market, so we're not looking at those financials as a direct hit on our bottom line. But I think there's no doubt that it's going to change, if not hurt, the market for aggregators, which tend to be, on the commercial side, just because it's easier to aggregate when you can get 1 megawatt at each location, sign a contract for 1 megawatt rather than sign a bunch of, 1,000 contracts to get to 1 megawatt. But one thing I wanted to touch on before we get to the audience questions, just because I heard opt-in, you mentioned opt-in. We were talking about pricing programs and getting them to scale. We were also talking about equality.
Yeah.
The way that we've always thought about this is opt-out design. So defaulting customers into certain types of programs, and then by doing so, you give them equal access to participate in programs that might be providing efficient technologies, so don't lend themselves to being opt-out design, right? If you have to raise your hand, it's really tough to get a customer to raise their hand. But if you can proactively send them information, maybe it'll become a little bit easier to get them to raise their hand. And so the way that we've always thought about our products is we try to design them in a way that can be delivered opt-out to customers, so that you can deliver the information to all the customers at once in an equal way, create a little energy efficiency, create some demand response, but by virtue of scaling it across the entire service territory, you're actually creating a really significant resource. So good example in the pricing, and this is why I thought of this, when you're talking about pricing. There was a study done by, I believe it was the Brattle Group, that they were rolling out an opt-in time of use pricing program. And economically, based on looking at load profiles for customers, the time of use rate, where they were charging customers more during peak hours, and then they were reducing their rate during off-peak hours a little bit. The time of use rate that they were implementing would create net economic benefit for 77% of customers. I mean, if I could poll the audience, it might take too long, but I'm guessing people would think that a significant proportion probably participated as a result. Maybe 50%, maybe 25%. We could do a Twitter poll if we had a little bit more time too. It ended up, as you can probably guess, much lower. So 1.5% ended up participating. Just because people, even if it's in their financial interest, aren't going to sign up for the program. So the approach we've taken to dynamic pricing, for example, and I think it'll be important for states like New York as they're going through the REV process, is with a partner in Maryland, we implemented a peak time rebate, which is paying customers for saving during peak hours. It's the inverse of the time of use of the critical peak price, where you're charging customers more during peak hours. We implemented that with opt-out design. So we automatically enrolled every customer in the peak time rebate. We would pay customers who saved during those peak hours. 2013 was the first summer we did it. We did it again in 2014 on their behalf. deployed to 1 million customers this past summer. And what we found is, over 80% of customers participated, and we found about a 5% average impact across 100% of customers. So you're seeing significant demand reductions. When you apply that to 1 million customers, you're getting to really significant numbers. And the last thing I'll say on that is the opt-out design is key to increasing participation in the residential space, but it's not enough. So you also have to be engaging customers with personalized information, which is what we found is the secret sauce that bridges just people participating to them doing something meaningful in a way that's actually going to drive outcomes that are attractive for both the utilities, the customers, and the system.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I've read a few of these questions, and there seems to be a few that are targeted at the same thing, and I guess it's to Think Eco. So is Think Eco looking at partnering directly with air conditioning manufacturers? What's your strategy around entering the home? It seems a bit unclear from the audience. Could you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, so there is one partnership that we announced with Friedrich, which is they make window air conditioners, and New York City is their biggest market. New York City is actually the biggest market for all window air conditioning makers. And if you look at numbers, people, millions of air conditioners sold every year. One would think that it's saturated in this marketplace, but there's still millions of units that are being sold. And we are currently working on other relationships with air conditioning manufacturers that are, taking their products into the next generation of, connected goods, right? And the answer is yes. I think, we are not equipped to be a hardware maker that's going to, put hardware in every single air conditioner that's out there. That's not the way the company's built. We also see the future as being one where software is the key way that you engage a customer to, whether it be opt out or opt into an existing utility program. But you need that key, engagement through software in order to make people interested in helping the grid. And I think to us, the hardware stuff is an enabler, and we're going to rely on partners to, provide that enablement.
Yeah, and it seems to be the case with many startups, at least, that are moving away from that hardware piece. In respect to selling your solution or partnering with utilities and moving ahead with programs with utilities, and utilities are characteristically do have longer sales cycles. How do you approach that? And as a smaller company, I believe you guys started off with a $1 million grant. How do you approach a long sales cycle industry?
Oh yeah, no, that is a very good question. Prior to Think Eco, I was in the biotech industry, where basically VCs will just give you, millions of dollars and not expect $1 in revenue because they want you to spend all your money in R&D, right? So it's a very different model. And I think you just have to be you have to really understand how programs scale in the utility industry. That's why I place a lot of emphasis early on M&V, right? If you create, we do direct load control. So if you have a direct load control and you run a pilot, but you don't do M&V, then pretty much you're back to square one in that you don't have the numbers to prove that you're actually doing what you're planning to do, right? So next year you're probably going to get a similar sized pilot, right? So you have to, understand that in order for a utility program to scale, you need the data, right? You need the ability to analyze the data. And you have to, of course, perform, right? Because if you don't perform, then you won't get that, right? So once you understand the cycle, then you realize that, okay, it's going to be a 2 to 3 year process to scale a program, and you have to adjust your company. If you have a young company with limited funding, then you have to start adjusting your strategy that's in line with that. So in our case, what we did was, we didn't start out with $80 million in venture capital. So our strategy was, instead of building out a sales force that's going to go nationally and try to get national pilots, right? We focused on the largest market, which is New York City, and wanted to make sure that we would win this New York City market. And I think it's slightly unconventional strategy, but I think once we realized what the slog was, let's say in terms of building out a big program, we thought that this was the best use of our resources. So I think that's what every company has to do, is that they just have to adapt their growth strategy to a long sales cycle, and you leverage partners. I want to emphasize that's key. Con Ed was a key partner for us in building our program.
Yeah.
So it's important to find those relationships.
And I've had the distinct pleasure of opportunity of going to see many of the incubators and meeting with a lot of the startup companies. One being the incubator where you guys came out of Urban Futures Lab here, just based over here in Brooklyn. So I was curious from a utility again, as someone that would engage in these projects and get partners with these with technology vendors. What advice would you have to those startup companies to partner with you guys, to engage in projects? What would you say to them to help them pick up with such a long sales cycle, for example?
Be patient. No. You bring up a very good point. But I would also argue that that's, under things like Rev, that's going to change a lot too, because one thing you realize that a lot of the funding that comes from this is highly regulated. The funding for that, for example, like the program the both of you guys run. We've started with Opower in Massachusetts, and you guys, I think, in upstate. Or maybe also Massachusetts. Yeah. That comes from the system benefit charge. You all get an electric bill or a gas bill, and there's a systems benefit charge on that. And there's a lot of rules and regulations on that. And those rules and regulations are geared so that, with the intent that the most cost-effective things get funded first and second and third in that order. That's the way that everything is laid out. And that's, I think, what's generated that they're done, because again, it's the push. It's the regulatory push on the utility and then the utility push on the customer. On the Rev, where the additional benefits are put together, and a lot of the corollary benefits that you guys talk about, in terms of value-added services, that changes all of that. And it doesn't become the legalistic, kind of police mentality that I think sometimes there is in some of these programs, because we have to make sure we get the best, the most bang for the SBC dollar. That will change now, because the customers will make the decision. The customers will decide what's valuable, not the utility or regulatory authorities. So I think that the situation is what it is now. I think it is getting better, but I think it'll dramatically change if Rev fulfills its vision.
Okay. And we've seen, especially with that, the most cost-effective projects being first. We've seen those typically like the easiest to install, the lowest cost projects really being at the forefront of adoption. I'm curious, with that being said, Opower, for example, how do you guys see going forward? How do you see implementing larger projects that cost more, for example? Yeah. And how do you see that change moving forward with the Rev initiative? But you guys are really globally positioned. Another part of this question would be, is there other things that are happening in the world that maybe could help teach us different things?
That's a great question. I'm sure I could learn a lot from our international markets myself. So I think just one comment on it. So I think it's important for everyone to keep in mind the policy perspective behind those rigorous requirements. I've actually found that I'm really appreciative of the longer. It ends up being a longer sales cycle, but it makes sure that you're building products with integrity, because you actually have to prove an outcome from the products, and have to prove that customers are going to receive net benefits from the products. So for me, especially being part of a mission-driven company, it actually, having that policy framework in position forces you to actually design the products in a way that are going to help you both accomplish that mission, but then also achieve the utility's goals, and then also deliver net benefit to the customer, create value. So I think that's, and I think it's been a really important and key piece to these markets becoming so stable and growing over time and becoming as robust as they are. So, and in terms of thinking about how to scale this up, create additional value add for customers, most exciting trend for me is the more or less the market forces you see at play that are going to, when combined with the right policy circumstances, the right policy frameworks, theoretically, you're going to see pretty robust growth in certain value-add technologies like distributed solar. That's a subject that comes up pretty frequently. You see cost plummeting for the production of those customer-sided units. So I think like that type of technology, you see Wi-Fi thermostats flying off the shelf. As sort of these technologies become distributed, just through commercial processes, that creates additional opportunities for companies like Opower to provide those value-add services. I don't see us taking any sort of departure, and I'm not one to comment on our future development, obviously, or any of those strategies. But this is Nick speaking for himself. But what I see actually more or less is just us continuing to help our utility partners adapt to that future where there are commercial forces that are increasing the uptake of some of these important devices in the home or connected to the home or associated with energy use. That can, in turn, result in a much more interesting and interactive marketplace for energy efficiency.
An extremely politically correct comment.
Yeah. You never know.
Okay, so I guess an interesting way to close out this debate would be to talk about, the future outlook. Let's say a large organization, possibly a co-sponsor of this event like NYSERDA, would come to you guys with they typically receive quite a lot of money to run incentive programs, demand response, energy efficiency. Let's say they came to one of you guys and gave you a substantial amount of money, $100 million. What would you guys do with that money to promote these programs? And what would we expect? From a utility, that's one thing, but from vendors, what kind of technology would you develop that would be cutting edge into the future? We can start with anyone who wants to take it.
Sure. I'll give it a go. Because the topic is data analytics and big data, right? So I think the one thing I think really would be helpful, maybe not for National Grid or for utilities as well, but a really comprehensive database of customers and what they're using and what their interests are, and a big customer database. And one of the reasons to say that and is that the energy industry is very fragmented. And when you think about it, we have utility, you have electric and gas utilities, even when they're the same, like we are, they don't always work together that well. Different utilities don't work together. Different up and down the value chain, the transmission companies, whether they be gas or electric, don't necessarily work together. They have transportation. All of that we've been talking in our business. I know our old CEO used to talk just about convergence. All these things are going to converge someday. And it's happening. It's going to happen sooner. It's going to happen later. All of these things, automotive, again, the value chain, the appliances, it's all going to converge someday. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And you guys, I think, are at the bleeding edge of that.
Yeah.
And when and having all of that data of how much fuel is used and how much energy is used and the greenhouse gas impacts and the economic impacts in one holistic model, I think is something that would be extremely valuable to our company and to probably every one of you guys who lived and breathed this every day.
Yeah, that Smart City initiative with Internet of Things is on the forefront of that, combining everything through, again, maybe it will be one standard communication platform in the future, but that's at least what we've been seeing. Yeah, and the data. Please, Nick.
Yeah, so Chris, talk to me after. We can develop that platform for you. We'll get all the utilities signed on. We'll handle that for you. Without
Nick, you guys spend quite a lot of money in R&D as it is.
We do, and so the way I always like to think about these types of problems, blue sky ideas, most of them focus on like smart cities initiatives, things that happen in kind of like a silo or a bubble, or are specifically designed around a demonstration of a type of technology, end up being really tough to scale. So I always think about how can we create or use R&D in a way that's going to increase the number of customers that have access to these types of services, that are more likely to buy these types of services. And what you see when you look at some industries, like if you look at energy efficiency, but even more so in demand response, you see a lot of cash incentives, the assumption that financial incentives are going to increase participation. What we've seen in demand response historically is, cash incentives are like 70% of all spending in residential demand response, but you're still seeing only 7% of customers participating. So if I had that $100 million and I could use it, I would try to use it toward creating, thinking thinking out of the box, but like an Uber-like app or something like that for energy services, so people would take up additional efficient technology. So you can imagine a situation where, what we've seen is a lot of the friction is not just the customer having a financial incentive to participate, but there being some sort of friction, transaction cost, the 9 minutes that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So develop technology that is creating even further, deeper touch points with customers at the right moment to encourage them to participate in some of these new efficient technologies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And John, if a package landed on your door of X amount of dollars, what would you do with it to promote this kind of movement?
Well, I'll take an undisclosed sum aside, for vacation.
Go to the beach.
Go to the beach. No, that's a great question. And I guess my feeling is I'd love to create something that's like, I don't know, like an eBay for energy efficiency, right? Let's say all 4 of us, right, have a load, window air conditioner, thermostat on the wall, and we're able to offer, right, our ability to either, reduce power by 20% or, offer the air conditioner to be, have the temperature raised a couple of degrees on a very hot day, right? And we throw it out in the marketplace, right? And then you have a utility that say, I'll aggregate these guys and I'll offer you this price, right? And there's like active price negotiation, right? So it's like, I want to create a platform which is kind of a market making, right? That connects the consumer, right, with the people who need the energy efficiency or the demand reduction, right? And I think that would be a great thing, because that means that all of us, whenever we go to a store, buy anything that's connected to the internet, then we have the option of offering that, right, to help conserve, energy, right? And I mean, that really goes back to my fundamental, the reason why I started the company and I, built the Modelet was that I wanted to create a device that helps democratize, electricity conservation. You stick this plug somewhere, and then all of us can then save a little bit, right? And in aggregate, you save a lot. And I still believe in that, and I think that there isn't really a platform to enable that. So, and I think we're getting there, and I'd love to create that. And I think once that's robust, then you could do all sorts of things. Like, it doesn't have to be cash incentives. It could be, I don't know, maybe it's a coupon to go, see a movie, right? Maybe people shed a little bit of load for that, and all this should be done dynamically at the marketplace, and we should, we'll see where the prices fall.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds phenomenal. I mean, for future applications, I'd say those were some awesome ideas. We're, I guess, all out of time for today's panel. So if you guys want to stick around, talk to our panelists, enjoy, our open bar. Thank you very much for coming here, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.